Hello YouTube, this is the Console Casual here, and on this very delayed episode of Deconstructed, we're finally taking a look at how to mod your weapons in Warframe. Now I do apologize for the delay in this, real life has caught up with me, plus I was making other videos, plus working on some Tenogen items, and I kind of got sidetracked here and there. In any case, we're all set and ready for episode 3 of Deconstructed, so let's dive right in. Now before we start off on how to mod your weapons, you're going to have to understand how damage works in Warframe. I'm going to give you a brief overview of damage, everything you need to know and nothing you don't. This section will be of 3 parts. In the first section I'll be talking about the different types of damage in Warframe, in the second I'll be talking about critical hits, and in the third about status effects. Warframe has a grand total of 14 different types of damage. Now it's very confusing when you first look at it, but on further scrutiny, you'll see that it's not that complicated. There are 3 physical damage types. These are impact, puncture, and slash. Now when you look at a weapon and you see its damage, you'll see that they're usually distributed between these 3 types of damage. There are also 4 elemental damage types: heat, toxin, electricity, and cold. Again, there are some weapons that deal only this form of damage as their primary damage type. Now by mixing these 4 elemental damage types together, we get secondary combined damage types. For example, heat and electricity damage get together to make radiation damage. Cold and toxin damage combine to make viral damage, so on and so forth, giving you 6 combined elemental damage types. Knowing these damage types is very important when you're facing enemies, because all enemies have either weaknesses or resistances to some forms of damage. You can check these weaknesses out either by scanning them into your codex. You'll see the weaknesses popping up in green and the resistances popping up in red once you've fully scanned an enemy, or of course you can take the easy way out like I usually do, and you can go check it out on the Warframe wiki. So how important is it to use the proper damage type against the proper type of enemy? I'll let you decide that for yourself. Here we're facing a heavy gunner. This enemy is weak towards corrosive damage. Let's see how long it takes to kill this enemy. Please note that I have petrified this enemy so that it does not undergo any status effects. This means that the only thing affecting this enemy is the raw damage of the weapon. Now I'm going to change the elemental type on this weapon and use gas damage, because heavy gunners are resistant to gas damage, and you'll see that it takes a lot longer. So in summary, we have 3 physical damage types, 4 primary elemental damage types, and 6 combined elemental damage types, which equals 13 damage types. We're missing out something, aren't we? That's right, there is one more type of damage in Warframe, and it's somewhat unique. There is no single weapon in Warframe that deals this damage innately. Another thing that makes it so unique is that it does not have any weaknesses or resistances to any of the enemies in the game. This damage type is finisher damage. You can only deal finisher damage by either the slash status effect, which we'll talk about a bit later, or by doing either melee counter-attack finishers from the front or stealth finishers from the back. However, ground finisher attacks from melee weapons do not inflict finisher damage. Now despite none of the enemies in Warframe actually being weak to finisher damage, it's one of the most powerful types of damage in game. Why? Because finisher damage has a unique property of bypassing both shields and armor. Armor especially is a huge problem on enemies. It'll usually negate most of the damage you're doing to an enemy, so anything that can bypass armor is extremely effective. Now that we've dealt with the different damage types, let's move on to critical hits. Critical hits, commonly referred to as crits, are weapon attacks that deal increased damage. Now this is usually a random chance. For example, you'll see here that this weapon has a 10% critical chance. That means out of all the bullets it fires, 10% of them will be critical hits. It also has the stat called the crit multiplier. This means the amount by which a critical hit will be multiplied. For instance, on this weapon the critical multiplier is 2, which means a critical hit will deal double the damage of a normal attack. Damage numbers on an enemy will normally appear in white, however for critical hits they will appear in yellow. Now if your critical chance is above 100%, which can be achieved with some weapons, all of your shots will be critical hits, which means all of your shots will show up in yellow. However, since the chance is above 100%, your crits also have a chance to crit, which will result in orange crits. These will deal double the damage of your normal yellow critical hit. In very special circumstances, your weapon's critical chance can go over 200%. In this instance, every single shot will be an orange crit and some of them will be red crits. The orange crit will deal double the damage of the yellow crit and the red crit will deal double the damage of the orange crit. Critical hits are one of the premier sources of damage in Warframe. You can dish out large amounts of damage very quickly. The only problem is critical hits do not apply for some things like objects. Objects in the environment like lockers, even certain parts of the enemies like nullifier bubbles and the turrets all have object health, so you can't use critical damage against them effectively. If by any chance your critical hit lands on an enemy's head, that's going to do massively multiplied damage. For instance, a dread bow, which is what the Stalker uses, properly modded, is said to be able to achieve 60 times its initial damage. Moving on from critical hits into the status effects. Now barring finisher damage, every single damage type in Warframe has its own unique status effect. Like a critical hit, each weapon attack has the stance to inflict a status effect on an enemy. However, unlike critical hits, once your status chance goes above 100%, you don't have the opportunity of dealing 2 status effects in a single attack. These status effects, I'm really going to have to stop saying that so many times. So I'll just use the common term to define them, which is the proc. Proc stands for Programmed Random Occurrence, which is what a status effect is. And I said it again. Now these procs have various effects. The puncture proc will weaken enemies, the slash proc will slowly bleed them out using finisher damage, the impact proc will knock them back, not very useful, and so on and so forth. For the sake of protecting my voice box, I'm not going to list out all the proc types in Warframe. However, some of the most effective are the corrosive proc, which will remove enemies' armor bit by bit, the viral proc, which will cut enemies' health in half every time it hits for a limited amount of time, the radiation proc, which can cause confusion in a group of enemies, causing them to attack each other. These are all very effective. This is not to say that the other status effects are completely useless, but I won't go into too much detail there. You can check them out in the Warframe wiki, which I will link down below. Now what must be noted with status is that it's affected by the percentage of damage present in a weapon. Let's talk about a hypothetical weapon here. We have a weapon that does 10 impact damage and 20 puncture damage, and it has a 30% status chance. This means that out of 100 bullets it fires, 30 of them will be inflicting status effects on an enemy. Out of those 30, 10 will be impact and 20 will be puncture, based on the distribution of the damage types. Understanding this is very important when you mod your weapon for status. If you want your weapon to consistently inflict a certain status effect, you're going to have that damage type far above the rest of the others.